Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to come and join us for the Seventh Circuit Bar Association Diversity Committee program. This is part of a series of programs that the Diversity Committee has been doing, and we are very excited that this is the first one right here in Milwaukee because we too are part of the Seventh Circuit. So it's nice to have it here locally, and we look forward to having more programs locally in Milwaukee and Indianapolis and Chicago, all throughout the Seventh Circuit, especially about important issues that we're about to talk to today. Since this is March and it's Women's History Month, I thought I would share some numbers with you before I turn it over to the panel that you came here to hear. For those of you in the room, there are a lot of familiar faces. You all know that I'm very passionate about mentoring, the topic that we're here to talk about. And it turns out the same reason that I know many of you are mentors yourself, and you mentor young people in this community in high school and college and through the Clavert internship program and mentoring program. It turns out the same reason we're mentoring younger people are also good reasons to mentor each other, to mentor lawyers, and the panel will talk about this. Getting back to Women's History Month, I read that 2016 was the first year that women outnumber men in law school. Oh. And 2017, the trend also continued. So despite this outnumbering of our male colleagues in law school, here's a little peek of how the gap looks in practice. These numbers are from a current glance. It's a report published by the ABA annually. It's a current glance at women in the law, and this was published January 2018. That's the most recent available report. So for summer associates, the numbers are 48% women. For associates, the numbers are 45%. For managing partners in 200 largest firm, the number is 25%. For equity partners, the number is 19%. And then finally, for partners in general, the number is 22%. So as we talk about mentoring and in the larger context of making our profession more diverse and more inclusive, let's keep these numbers in mind, and I think those numbers would kind of motivate us why this conversation is necessary. And we know it's not only for women, but it's also for people of color and their representation in the legal profession. So again, thank you. Please stay to have not just listen to the panel, but hopefully for us to have a dialogue as well. Thank you again to the Seventh Circuit Bar Association for all the hard work that you did in putting this program together. We appreciate you very much.
Thanks, Judge Joseph. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is Allison Ryman, and I am a litigator with Godfrey and Kahn's Madison office and a member of the Seventh Circuit Bar Association's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. As Judge Joseph said, we're very excited to bring our first ever program here to Wisconsin and hope it is the first of many to come. Our topic today, of course, is mentorship in the legal profession. Mentorship obviously should be a topic that's of importance to all lawyers, both for their own career development and to impact the success of those coming up behind them. The topic of mentorship also has special significance in the context of creating a more diverse and more inclusive profession. And our panelists today, who I will introduce in a moment, bring a diverse range of perspectives. And our goal today is to provide you as many practical tips as possible to bring back to your offices and career environment with you. Before we get started, it looks like everybody signed in for CLE as you've come in, but if you haven't, please go ahead and sign in. We also have a lot of mentoring-related resources for you on the table with the cookies and refreshments. We also expect that today's topic will generate a lot of questions. Just to make sure we can get through our program today, we have some time allotted for questions at the end, but we'd ask that you keep your questions for the end if you don't mind. And I'd just like to give a special thank you to the Seventh Circuit Bar Association for sponsoring this program, Judge Joseph's assistance in setting us up here in the courthouse, and also want to thank my co-organizer of the panel, Laura McNally of Loeb and Loeb, who's also a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And if anybody has any questions about our committee or would like to get involved, please feel free to talk to one of us. So to introduce our panelists, I'm going to start at the far end of the panel and work towards me. We first have Ida Abbott, who is president of Ida Abbott Consulting. She works with lawyers and legal employers around the world to promote lawyers' development, retention, and advancement. She focuses on the power of mentoring relationships to guide, support, and transform professional careers from the beginning of practice through retirement. She's the author of several works relating to mentorship, including The Lawyer's Guide to Mentoring and Sponsoring Women, What Men Need to Know. She's also authored some booklets on mentoring, both being a good mentor and being a lawyer receiving mentorship, and we have copies of some of her works on the table, as well as order forms for some of her books if you're interested in learning more. Next to Ida is Margaret Hickey. She's a shareholder in the law firm of Becker, Hickey, and Poster, where she practices in the areas of family and elder law. She's currently a member of the State Bar's Diversity and Inclusion Oversight Committee, as well as its Leadership Development Committee. And she's also on the subcommittee that oversees the State Bar's mentorship program called Ready, Set, Practice. She formerly served on the State Bar's Board of Governors, and she also is a past president of the Milwaukee Bar Association. Next to Margaret is Brittany Grayson. Brittany is an assistant district attorney with the Milwaukee County DA's office. She's currently assigned to the Early Intervention Unit. She has served on the board of the Wisconsin Association of African American Lawyers, or WAL, on and off since 2011, which is the year she graduated from Marquette University Law School. She currently serves on the State Bar's Board of Governors, representing District 2 in Milwaukee, and she also works with the subcommittee in charge of the Ready, Set, Practice program. Next to Brittany is my colleague Tom Shorter, who is a shareholder at Godfrey and Kahn. He's the chair of Godfrey and Kahn's healthcare team and represents a range of healthcare-related organizations and other clients in healthcare, corporate, labor and employment, and regulatory matters. He's also on the board of directors of the American Health Lawyers Association and chairs its Diversity and Inclusion Council. So with that, what we'd like to start with is talking a bit about why mentorship matters in the legal profession. And I'd like to start by asking Ida to address that topic, because it's a topic she's written and spoken about at some length. What's important about mentoring relationships in our profession, and how can it help make our profession more diverse and inclusive?
Oh, here. There, that's better. All right. So, how nice to be here in sunny Milwaukee instead of California, where I live. And congratulations. I understand this is the place to be. I just read that the 2020 Democratic Convention is going to be in Milwaukee. So obviously this is the place to be this in the next couple of years. And by the time they get here, you all will be, if you're not already, outstanding mentors and have all the mentors you need, because some of you already know this and are doing it, and the rest of you are going to be able to do that and eager to do it when you leave here today, I hope. I want to start out by giving you some background, and then I'll sit down and I guess we'll have some questions and a chance to discuss. But Allison asked me to give you some general background about mentoring and why is it such a topic, that keeps coming back over and over again in the legal profession. And some of that is because we don't do it as well as we should. And even those of us who do it well don't necessarily do it as broadly as we should and we could. And mentoring has a long tradition in the legal profession, partly because it's a profession where people learn from each other, And partly because of the apprenticeship model that was really how lawyers first became lawyers and learned. You learned at the foot of the master. You learned by watching somebody. You've heard probably the phrase carrying his bags to court. I mean, I've been around long enough that is how I learned. And I did walk and carry somebody's bags and watch in court and spend my time because we didn't have to bill hours. And we didn't have to worry about FaceTime, and it was a different world. And one of the differences that we see today is how hard it is for people to find the time to pay attention to each other. And that is really at the core of what mentoring is about. So it arose at a time when people needed to transfer information. And a lot of people think that's what mentoring is just transferring information. So part of mentoring is that. It's somebody who is experienced actually sharing what they know, what they've learned with you so that you don't have to make all the same mistakes they did. You'll make your own. But they can, shortcut that process and help you avoid some of the pitfalls. So when you come out of law school, what do you know? You know how to take tests. You may know how to do research, but you don't necessarily have the skills to get out there and practice. And a lot of mentoring a lot of attention has been given to mentoring in the last several years because so many people go into solo practice right out of law school without really having any connection to the community, the legal community, without really knowing what it looks like, what it is to be a practicing lawyer. And that's not the way most law schools are structured, so that you don't learn that as a student. And what started to happen in the early 2000s was that some states started at Georgia, some states started having statewide mentoring programs. Several of them, 5 or 6 of them, I think, are mandatory. So you can't get your full license to practice unless you have had some time with a mentor. And most of the other programs, more than half the states have programs. I understand Wisconsin is one of them. They vary. Some of them, they're all over the place. Some of them are very structured. Some of them are just matching programs. Some give you guidelines, some give materials, some have programming. But whatever they are, they're a means of connecting young lawyers to people who have some experience who can help them. This is a helping process. And mentoring should be seen as an act of generosity because it is taking your time to help somebody else. It's also something that should be done automatically. It's not something that you need to be, and most mentors don't ask to be patted on the back for doing it, and most of it happens without anybody knowing it. You don't think about it in those terms. People don't walk around with M's, on their lapels, and so we learn in the daily course of everyday practice. But if you're by yourself, or if you're a place that's so busy that nobody has time to really talk to each other, then where do you get that? And that's one of the needs, that's one of the reasons that young lawyers in particular want to find mentors. And of course, I'm dealing now not just with young lawyers, but with senior partners who are looking to retire and don't know how. And they don't know what they could possibly do if they ever leave practice, which none of them want to do. No lawyer, most lawyers don't want to ever give it up. And so, there's that uncertainty, that unknowingness. How do I do it? Having somebody who has some experience and insights is helpful at any point in your career, especially points when there's going to be some change. And entering the profession is a big part of it. Becoming a senior associate if you're in a firm and having to manage other people, becoming a partner is a significant change with all kinds of differences in what's expected of you, what your responsibilities are. So those are all times. Becoming a leader in a firm or in a state bar, or becoming a judge, becoming the leader of a section or a practice group, like Thomas, whatever it is, all of that requires doing something you haven't done before. And if there's somebody who can help you do that, it makes your life so much easier. And considering how much stress you're under, all the time and how hard it is to practice law. Having that connection with somebody is a critical piece, and it's why one of the main reasons mentoring is so desired and so important. So we've got the learning piece, we've got the connection. The other important thing about the connection, and one of the reasons state bars are so involved, is that being a lawyer is being part of a profession. It's not just a job. And being part of a profession requires service, it requires a responsibility to society. You're licensed and you are given all kinds of privileges as a lawyer. And in order to carry out those privileges, you have a duty of competence, but you also have a responsibility to the profession and, as well as to your clients. And that includes, all of us not only need to do this, we want to be with other people we can trust, other people we can rely on in terms of their competence and their reliability, but also, that these are people that we want to practice with or practice against. It's an adversarial system, but what you want is a sense of ethical responsibility and ethical practice. It goes beyond just knowing the rules. And you can take the test and know the rules, but what does it look like in practice when you're up against a really tough dilemma and you're not sure it could go, the answer isn't so clear. And the whole, area of ethics is very often not so clear. So having someone being connected to a profession, having people you can talk with, having people you can talk with either to teach or to learn. And one of the things I want to emphasize here is a major difference in the way we think of mentoring today and the way we did 20 years ago or 30 years ago, however. It's always been mutual, and that's what's so unique about mentoring, and it's why it's so important. It's based on a relationship. So I hope when you leave here today, you will have learned something from all of us who are up here and maybe from questions in the audience or comments, but that's not a relationship. Mentoring is a developmental process, but it is based on people knowing each other. So the better I know you, the better I can help you. The more you can trust me to give you advice that's suitable for me, not just generic. And so that's why this idea, when I talk about connections and I talk about relationships, it's critical. It's critical as a matter of being a professional and being a lawyer and basically just kind of getting on in the world. How do you deal with your clients? Part of having the privilege of being a lawyer is that you get privileges, you get to hear things and talk to your clients about things that other people don't and that other people won't necessarily know. In order to do that, your client has to trust you. You have to have a good relationship with the client. Now, I know your clients lie to you, and if you're doing criminal work, there's not a lot of love sometimes, but there still has to be a sense of trust in who you are, and you have to believe it of yourself. And so how do you do that? You can practice. You learn it through building relationships in general, building a reputation, and letting people see through the role modeling that you do, the way you carry yourself. That's part of what mentoring is as well. You don't necessarily have to know all your role models. You can admire people you've never met or who have been dead for 100 years. But to have a mentor as a role model is something really invaluable. Keep in mind, however, I have clients, and I've interviewed people who, when I ask them about mentors, they say, well, didn't have a mentor, but I had a tormentor. These are people who are not necessarily role models, but can help you in many different ways because you learn from them. Their clients love them, even if nobody wants to work with them in the office. And so looking to those people as to see what you can learn from them and what you can learn also about what not to do. So this isn't about friendship. Sometimes you become good friends and that's a bonus. Treasure that. When that happens, when you have a strong mentoring relationship that continues as a friendship, fabulous. But that isn't going to happen for everybody, especially if you're being matched in a program, if you're mentoring. And by the way, my comments apply whether it's a program, not a program, doesn't matter. I'm talking about the relationship that it's at the heart of it. And you can have the best designed, most elegant program in the world that goes nowhere because the people aren't in the program aren't connecting, and they
Ida.
aren't building that relationship.
Thanks. You know what, I think we should probably turn it over to our panelists just to make sure we stay on schedule, but that's an excellent introduction. Thank you so much for
That's
sharing that with
absolutely
us.
fine. But I'll just emphasize
Sure.
that's what we're going to be talking about through the entire program, is this connection and this idea of building the trust and the sense of responsibility and caring that comes with a relationship in both directions. Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
So Margaret, Brittany, and Tom, I just like to take a moment to invite each of you to provide your own thoughts on the importance of mentorship. I mean, Ida provided a lot of really great points there, but if you have anything to add or have a story that you could share with our audience about how a mentoring relationship has impacted your careers or the career of somebody that you've mentored, really just show firsthand how it's impacted your own life. Maybe Margaret, we could start with you.
Sure. I think you don't really find a successful lawyer who hasn't had mentors. I mean, quite frankly, anybody, whether up here on the panel or in the room, part of being a good lawyer is to have good mentors. And that doesn't mean you have to be in a mentorship program. It doesn't mean it has to be formal. But having someone that you can go to and talk to when you have questions. And that person maybe shouldn't necessarily be in your law firm, because if the question is, I'm really worried that I messed up on this thing and how can I fix it, which the lawyer who's in charge of your firm should know about, but you might want to have someone informal to talk about it. So I thought a little bit about who I've had as mentors, and I've been really fortunate over the years to work in law firms where I had people who were very smart, very capable, and who mentored me. In my first firm, which was at Gibbs, Roper, Lotz & Williams doing litigation, I had a good mentor. And then I moved over to Charney, Glassner, T. and Clancy, and Tatelman. Both firms don't exist anymore, and I'm not sure if that has to do with me. But anyway, I had Becker at the second firm, and we ended up, over many years, eventually becoming partners, but we started out in a senior-junior kind of relationship. And just having someone to help me learn the areas of law, help me understand, preparing for court, being able to ask any question and not worry about repercussions, which I think is part of a good mentorship relationship. But then I started thinking about, well, how have I been mentored as I've advanced in my career? So eventually I became a managing partner of a law firm. Well, I didn't know how to do that. I know training in law school is pretty useless, at least back 30 years ago when I went to law school for that. So I reached out to people I knew, other people who manage small law firms. I said, hey, can we get together and have lunch? Can you please help me understand, what the heck is a CGL policy? And so I had that kind of mentoring through people that I knew. And so I think it is symbiotic, what you're discussing. Really good mentoring is you learn from the mentor, the mentee learns from both sides learn something. And I think the other thing I would say, and we're going to talk more about tips later, but look around you. Who are you interacting with? Probably there's a mentor there, even if it isn't someone who originally came to mind, but it's maybe someone you're working with, maybe someone you know, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to have that person become a mentor.
Thanks, Margaret. Brittany, what are your thoughts?
So I have a bit of a different experience because I think I'm the only one in government work. So I work at the DA's office. We don't have a formal mentorship program, so your relationships there are built mostly on, you come in and you are pretty quickly thrown into whatever your assignment's going to be. Our office is broken down into different kinds of teams who handle different kinds of cases. So you put on a team and you have a team captain, and your team kind of becomes your family, and your captain's the person you go to if that last minute crisis or whatever the case. So our mentorships are really formed informally, and you learn, because you have to trust your teammates pretty quickly, pretty early on. From my perspective, all the mentors that I've had, for the most part, have been those that started either at work in that kind of organic way, that informal way, or because I've been involved on boards and, being involved in a board, maybe we have events and you go to events and you meet other lawyers and you kind of build your network in that way. So I'm at a point in my career where I've developed mentors because of those avenues, not because there was a formal program in my job or because I knew that that the state bar or the Milwaukee bar had a program that I could have signed up for, which could have just been me not paying attention. I don't know. But those were things I didn't know about kind of coming out of law school. So my relationships kind of formed because I needed them to, because if something happened in court, I had a last-minute motion came up I had to respond to in like 10 minutes. So I need to find someone who can help me immediately. But then that person might become your go-to. Something else happens, and you're like, okay, you helped me before. Can you help me again? And that's how you build those relationships. So that's kind of how mentorship has evolved in my career.
Tom?
I'll just add a couple of things to this. So from a context standpoint, I'm hitting my 23rd year of practice, which feels funny to even say that, to be honest. And I've spent all of my career in private law firms, tending towards what Wisconsin would call the larger firms, what nationally would be very tiny firms. But when I look back at both the experiences that I have had as somebody who was a mentee and the experiences that I've had as a mentor, and I still, after 23 years, I will tell you I have both. I still have mentors that I routinely meet with, and I have lots of folks that I mentor in the practice. One theme comes up for me, and that is career satisfaction. And I say that because in the early years, part of career satisfaction for me was somebody pulling me aside saying, yeah, the partner, when she said that it was okay to turn that memo in on Friday, that's not really what she meant. She actually meant Wednesday is what she's really intending, and if you do it Friday, that's not going to go well. I mean, that was career satisfier for me. I now know when to do this. And later, as you go on and you start to get into a position where you're looking in the private practice for how do you develop business, how do you gain expertise, there's mentors all along the way. And you'll hear everybody up here, I think, use mentors as plural. You will not have one mentor, nor should you just mentor one person. It is a plurality. There's a lot of different things. There's different experiences. Every one of those thematically, though, for me, I look back at them and I say, that was a path for me to career satisfaction and knowing what I wanted to pursue and helping someone, having somebody help guide me, and then doing that as well for other folks that are coming along. I find that personally very career satisfying.
Great. So I'm hearing a lot of different types of mentors that you might have in a lawyer's career. I mean, you have somebody who might be advising on business development. You might be having somebody who's advising you on your substantive practice area. You might be having somebody who's providing more big picture career advice. You've all hinted a bit at ways that one might find a mentor, but I'd like to go through some of the specific ways where a lawyer may find one. I'd like to start with more formal mentoring programs, such as programs that are either sponsored by a law firm or other employer, or a state bar association, local bar association. Ida, how about you start by just providing your insights on just briefly on some of the characteristics of successful mentoring programs within organizations, meaning employers' mentoring programs.
Well, if you're asking how to find the right, a good mentor within a program.
Or more specifically, what are some of the characteristics of a good structure of a mentoring program? What works, what doesn't? Say if a law firm is going to try to set up a formal program matching, say, a junior associate to somebody more senior. I know from my own experience, having worked in both a very large international law firm and Godfrey and Kahn here in Wisconsin, that there's something to be said for having a mentor assigned to you, but at the same time, when it's somebody who's assigned to you and there's not a lot of care given to that exercise, it doesn't really necessarily work. You don't necessarily click. But I know, Ida, that this is something that you advise firms on. So I'm wondering what you found from having seen law firms make mistakes, have successes, and maybe not just law firms, but other organizations. What works when an employer wants to set up a mentoring program that's successful?
Well, I mean, there are some things that are important for any program, whether it's in the DA's office, whether it's in a small firm where you don't really need much structure at all, or if it's a large international corporation. It's not limited to law firms. The major thing is to make it really clear why you're doing this. is what are you trying to achieve with the mentoring program? Sometimes, it's a Band-Aid, and it's not really addressing the underlying problem. You're not, I mean, a lot of people start mentoring programs because they want to increase diversity. Well, a mentoring program is one small piece. That's not going to solve your problem. So you need to make sure that you understand why you have the mentoring program in the first place. You need clear objectives, and you need a structure. And I'm not someone who wants a lot of structure, and I know certainly among lawyers, you're dealing with enough rules and reports and everything else. You want to keep it to the minimum, but you need to give people some guidance about what the expectations are. What should they be doing? What should they be trying to achieve within their pair or group? There are a lot of group mentoring programs now, a lot of different models. And a lot of people are starting things like reverse mentoring programs and and sponsorship programs, and we may want to talk about sponsorship in a little bit too. But all of those are great if you have the framework and the culture to support it. And so understanding what you're trying to achieve, whether the environment, the community you're trying to work to have the program for, is going to sustain it. If it isn't going to work, don't do it. I mean, you really need to think that through. And so, I can give you a checklist of things to go through, but, the fundamental thing really is, why are you doing it, and are the people you're trying to reach able to do it and willing to do it? And if all the other things are there, you can find a way to persuade them. But it really has to be a voluntary thing. And so to impose that on people isn't going to work either.
Tom, what has your experience been with mentoring programs set up by law firms? You've been at a couple. What have you seen that works and what doesn't work?
Right. Most, and certainly all my experiences in the larger firms, there's been a formalized mentoring program that's been put in place, which in particular for incoming newer lawyers is an opportunity to match them with someone more senior. I think understanding, to Ida's point, what is it you're trying to achieve through those programs? The ones that I think are successful are understanding that the purpose of that mentor is very much here's what life in this law firm looks like. And so my point earlier of, so that partner would like the memo 2 days before she says she is in, those are the kinds of things that you can achieve through a firm mentoring program. And I will tell you, I think those programs oftentimes, they are a little bit hit or miss. And it's like any sort of program, it's really what the individuals who are willing to participate are willing to get out of it. And so sometimes those assignments happen in a very formal way, and there really is no mentoring relationship that's going on there. In fact, maybe not even be getting together to talk about anything. But it's at least a forum to start an opportunity for that. But that's only one type of mentor from my perspective. It's just one type. There's a lot of other, spots where you can get mentors for other things as well.
Margaret and Brittany, you're both have been involved in the Ready, Set, Practice program through the State Bar Association. Maybe, Margaret, could you tell the audience a little bit about that program to the extent they don't know about it, and some of the ways it's been successful and some of the challenges it's faced?
Absolutely. So that program's been around probably maybe 4 years or so, and it was started by the State Bar recognizing that so many young lawyers are going out, like Ida is saying, and trying to open up a shop and don't have, any mentors, or they're at a small firm or even a mid-sized firm and don't feel they're getting mentored. And so we started this program. Each year we match, somewhere between 20 and 30 mentors and mentees. And I gave you a part of the 70-plus page handbook. Leave it to the State Bar to, cross every T and dot every I. So there is a pretty nice handbook, actually, about what the program is about and how mentors should approach it and how mentees should approach it, and even very specific practice area tips, which I didn't provide to you. But the struggles of the program have been real in terms of particularly finding mentors. We get a lot of mentee applications, but then we might get 5 or 10 mentors and we need 25. And so all of a sudden we're on the phone, those of us on the committee, trying to call people, look for people, trying to match up what mentees say they want, because they usually will give us a description. Well, I want someone in my practice area, or I want someone who's going to help me more with building my practice. And so we're trying to find someone who will match that sort of criteria. But it's tough, and obviously I agree that when you're kind of throwing people together, it is probably not as ideal as the ones that are more organic and that flow out of the people that you meet, the people that you know, people in your practice area. And just to mention a few others that exist, in the state, there's a very good mentorship program in Dane County that's probably been around for 10 or 12 years, and I understand they have pretty great success using senior lawyers with younger lawyers. And I'm sure that there are others within the different counties, county bar associations.
Many law schools, too.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can go back to most law schools. I mean, it's for students, but many times volunteering to be a mentor connects you to other people, other mentors and other people in the community where you can find mentors that you need.
So let's focus a little bit on informal sources of mentors. Brittany, I know from our discussions that you've been successful in finding mentors in a variety of places, whether it's your employer, board memberships, et cetera. Can you just share some of your experiences in different places you found mentors?
Sure. So that very first team that I was on in the DA's office was the domestic violence team. And that my team captain has since left the DA's office. He's now in the Attorney General's office. But he was great. He's someone who, I had to come to talk about, hey, I have this trial, I'm not sure what to do because of X. Or I think I want to dismiss this case because of Y. And these are like life or death kind of decisions for people in a way, because it's a criminal case. And so we've accused someone of doing something. So there's a defendant, there's a victim, there are families on both sides. And because the decisions are so, I think, important, because the work is so important and so heavy at times, I think it really draws you you have a connection with people. It draws you together. You develop a lot of trust in people. So he's one of the first people that I would call a mentor to me. And he since has moved on, but he's still a mentor to me. We still get together and we have coffee or lunch and we talk about career things, big picture things, DA's office life. That's like a relationship that I've had since 2013 at this point. And so those, relationships in the office, I would say, those are all helpful for life in the office and kind of you're in the trenches together and kind of just getting people to lean on, I would say. But that also creates these mentor-mentee relationships because we've got newer ADAs coming in who are getting the same sort of, kind of sink or swim type of reaction to, being in the office. So that's one section, I think, of people that I've connected with. I think also getting involved in different boards. So I'm on the State Bar Board of Governors. I'm on the board of WAL. I'm on the alumni board of the Marquette Law School. I'm on 6 committees for the law school. I'm on a couple of other boards. And so just being involved with boards and going to events where you meet people. I met Judge Joseph at an event. So she's someone that, I come in contact with a lot. But you just start to build, you would see someone, oh, I saw you at whatever other event. And you build these organic relationships where you find more things to talk about. And then you get more comfortable. And then you say, oh, it would be great if I could pick your brain on X, Y, or Z. And that's the first step to kind of building that relationship with someone that you might not know very well. Whereas maybe that first meeting, it seems intimidating. Once you've seen them at 3 or 4 events, you have something to talk about and you feel more comfortable. So I've also found mentors in that way, and then you build those relationships and keep those connections. Aside from that, kind of being old enough to be a mentor at this point, I would say going back to the law school and speaking to students who are terrified of being a lawyer, but also being in a position where I can connect them to other people too, so I can kind of share my mentors with them. This is somebody who was really great for me when I was starting out. Here's their information. So just as a mentor, I think understanding and realizing that younger lawyers and law students are scared of being in the legal field, just kind of in general. It's a big responsibility, and it should be. But then also meeting people, and you can help them in that process because you know what it's like to kind of struggle and be uncomfortable and be afraid. So those are the ways I think that I've built those relationships and then helped others as well.
Margaret, you work in a smaller firm. Do you have any tips for finding mentors when you work in a small organization?
Well, it's interesting. I will say, having gone through a lot of these mentor applications now, I'm really surprised how many come not just from small firms, but from medium-sized firms where people don't feel like they're being mentored. So I don't think it's unique to a small firm. I think we have to maybe try a little harder because we don't have a natural built-in kind of system. However, having said that, I work really hard to mentor the younger lawyers in my firm. I really do spend a lot of time with them, not just in training, but talking about how to be a good lawyer. What does it mean? If the other side does this, crap to you, should you respond in kind? Those kind of really basic things, but that help as you're a young lawyer. Tom and I, when we were talking on the phone, I think had a similar experience of, I get a lot of phone calls from people because I've been doing this a long time, and I've never said no to someone who calls me on the phone and wants to have coffee, wants to have lunch. I might not become that person's long-term mentor, but I'm more than happy to sit down and talk to someone, and this happens a lot when people are at a point of changing careers. Hey, I'm at this firm and I'm thinking about moving. What should I do? Or I'm starting out and I am going to open up my own office, and how should I do that? How do I make connections? How do I get business? So I think that's something that maybe we've both done, and that I think, again, it's sort of a natural way to help younger lawyers and, to meet a lot of good people. I've met, some amazing people through those kind of things who are now more seasoned lawyers and colleagues. So maybe you can respond to that in terms of, the way that this comes about, which I want to encourage any younger lawyers in the office, the audience, or people who are looking, don't hesitate to pick up the phone. If there's someone who you feel that you might have an affinity with, or you admire, or you think they practice in a way that you'd like to practice, call them. And I don't think you're going to probably have trouble with getting at least some guidance.
Yeah, my experience is that certainly on the informal side, there are a lot of people actually that are very willing. Margaret, talks about that. And by the way, it doesn't, hi, I'm Tom, I need a mentor. That's really not how the phone call goes, right? It's usually, I met you, or I saw you speak, or I've interacted with you on a case. I'd love to have, 15 minutes, 20 minutes with you just to sit down, have a cup of coffee, have a beer after work, something just to have a conversation to begin to learn about them. That's really how it happens. I mean, that's I think about all of the individuals outside of our law firm that I have sort of stepped in that role. I don't think one of them has ever been somebody acknowledging I'm the mentor and you're the mentee, and that's the format. That's just not part of it.
Yeah.
And truthfully, that's the sort of organic style that I think is the best, because I could take any one of those situations, and I will tell you, I get takeaways from them as much as, if not more than, the individual who supposedly is the mentee if we were assigning roles. It's a relationship that's about learning from one another and then helping to provide guidance. So there are lots of formal structures, and the State Bar one is one that's mentioned. The American Health Lawyers Association, where I serve on the board, we have a formal mentoring assignment program. It's a database. It's the same thing I've done, like Margaret. I go out and have to recruit sometimes people who want to be mentors, and oftentimes I don't say mentor. I say, hey, would you be willing to be on a list of people who are exploring health law as a career could reach out to? Oh, sure, I'd love to do that. Be happy to. I don't say the word to them. We just then get them in the database for people to be able to reach out to them. So it's, again, associations where you see people, boards, experiences are phenomenal opportunities. Those are all good spots.
Mm-hmm.
Ida, you mentioned a little bit ago the concept of sponsorship. Could you speak a little bit about that? I know it's a topic you've written a lot about, what's the distinction between a sponsor and mentor, if any, and, why are sponsors important? How does one develop a sponsor?
I want to answer that, but because this point that everybody has made about reaching out is absolutely the key to the whole process, and it's the one that most lawyers don't take advantage of. They don't do it. And if you're sitting in the audience and you are looking for a mentor, close your eyes for 10 seconds, think of what you want, somebody who might be able to do it, write down the name, go back to your office and call them. If you wait more than half an hour, it isn't going to happen. So, I mean, it's so easy, but it sounds easy, but it's really hard for most people to do it. Okay, sponsorship. One of the aspects of mentorship that has received a lot of attention in the last just 4 or 5 years is the mentor as an advocate. And that's somebody who goes to bat for you, who says, this person should get, she's been doing misdemeanors, it's time for her, she's ready, even though she doesn't think she is, I know she's ready, right? Or it's somebody who says, this guy's ready to be the practice group leader. I know you don't think so, but this is why it's important. This person is the one who ought to be the next president of this association. Whenever you're looking to move up, whenever you're looking for a bonus, whenever you're looking for an advocate who stands up for you in front of other people, not just to you, and says this person is ready and deserves it and should get it, that's a sponsor. And the main difference is anybody in this room could be a mentor and should be a mentor. Anybody who's been doing anything for a little bit longer than you can give you advice and give you information that's useful. A sponsor has to have some influence or some power or be in a position to actually have their voice mean something. If I walk into your firm and say, Nancy should be a partner, nobody's, who cares? I could be the nicest person in the firm. But if people don't believe that I'm the one who matters, they may not listen to me. But if I'm in a position where I can make the assignment, make the appointment, get some, if I'm on the compensation committee and I can make a difference in your compensation, if I'm in that kind of position, I'm in a role to be a sponsor. There are a lot of firms putting together sponsorship programs. There are a lot of corporations do this. Law firms are trying to do it. Some are succeeding. Most of them, are kind of iffy. They're more like mentoring programs. But you can see where you can assign a mentor very easily to just be helpful, to give advice, to give some direction, to introduce people around. But asking someone to be an advocate requires a lot more. And you really have to earn that by being somebody who's seen as worthy of my advocacy. Because I'm taking a risk. I'm putting my reputation on the line, my political capital. There are a lot of people, and the higher you go up in an organization, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a law firm or a corporation or anything else, the fewer the resources and positions there are and more people vying for them. And that's why it's important to have somebody to help you stand out. And so you have to do the initial work of making yourself somebody seen as worthy of that kind of support.
Tom, I could see that you were nodding as Ida was talking about sponsorship. How have you seen sponsorship play out in your own career, whether acting as somebody's sponsor or being sponsored yourself?
Right. My own personal experience on this has been that that is oftentimes something that comes as a result of a mentoring relationship. I mean, where I've been able to be in that role, it took a period of time for me to get to know the individual, understand what they wanted to do with their career, understand, sort of directionally where things were going. And then at some point I said, I think I can help you because I know this person or I know this opportunity, and I will now sort of step in and sort of, act really almost as a sponsor, as it were. And so as you were describing that, I was thinking, oh, I guess I've done that before. I didn't really know that I was thinking about it in that way, but that's how I've sort of approached it. But again, I think my experience is that comes with a period of time getting to know somebody, really.
And I'd like to comment on that as well, because even if you don't currently have the sponsor, there are ways to develop that. So I've served on a lot of boards also, and I've had a lot of people come to me, hey, Margaret, how do I get onto that elder law board, or how do I get onto that family law board? And I can sit down with someone and say, here's what you really need to do if you want to ultimately be a board member. You need to get on a committee to start with. You need to write an article and stand out in your profession. You need to volunteer to speak at one of our seminars, so that it's not that difficult to build the base that you need to become this thing that is your goal that you want to achieve. But what I see and I don't care for, and I see it, well, Margaret, will you just, recommend me to be on the board? Well, no. Just like you're saying, because there is political capital there, and I'm not going to recommend someone who hasn't kind of earned their stripes and paid their dues, all those old-fashioned things that still actually matter. So, but I think there are ways to get where you want to go. And I've had younger lawyers say, well, I ultimately want to be a partner. What do I need to do? We'll sit down. Okay, these are your goals. This is what you need to achieve. So there's almost always someone who can get you there, but you're going to need to figure out who to have help you.
And a lot of firms look at this as, a lot of firms see sponsorship as something totally separate. A lot of organizations do too. They're treating it as a different kind of dynamic. And sometimes that's true, especially in a corporation where managers can be assigned to be sponsors. But in a law firm that's a partnership, it's different. And so you really do need to try to build those mentoring relationships, to have people, and the person who doesn't have power today may have power tomorrow. So it's not a matter of just looking for the most powerful person in the room, because they may want to help you or they may not, but you just never know who's going to be in a position. And maybe I should just give you an example using one of the examples that Margaret mentioned about going to a conference, right? So a mentor might say, I think it's really important for you, Margaret, to go to that conference because these people are going to be there and you should meet them. Mm-hmm. A sponsor is somebody who says, I'm speaking at that conference. I want you to come with me, and I'm going to introduce you to Tom and Brittany because they're the ones who can make sure that you get the role that's important. Mm-hmm. You see, I don't know if it's a fine distinction. It's a big distinction. It's a much more active and engaged role. And so, if you're looking to advance, and if you're in a small practice, or a solo practice, it may be in the community. It may be through a community organization, a state bar, or a professional organization. It doesn't have to be all lawyers either. If you're looking to get yourself established, you need clients. Where are you going to meet people? Where are you going to build a reputation? If the United Way is the major thing in Milwaukee, get on a committee at the for the United Way and get your name out there, and then move up in the ranks there. Find the president and let them know you're really eager to take a leadership role, and if someday you can ask for it, and if it's not today, if you're enough of a pest, they'll probably appoint you somewhere.
Brittany, I'm interested in your thoughts on this topic. I was thinking when we first discussed you being on this panel recently, you mentioned to me that when you were first looking for jobs, in a sense, you had some sponsors, like people you had met who, referred you to positions, vouched for you, et cetera. Could you speak a little bit about how sponsorship has played out in your own career and how you've seen it work in government?
Sure. So I graduated in 2011. And there were no jobs.
Yeah.
It was the economy kind of tanked in 2008, and then people were like, well, don't worry, you're just a first-year law student, it'll rebound by the time you graduate. And that really wasn't the case, because fewer lawyers were being hired, so it kind of just trickled down where maybe bigger firms were taking fewer people, but then you ended up with just this overflow of lawyers who were all very well qualified, but just didn't have jobs. So I had worked for a sole practitioner all throughout law school and for part of college he did real estate and personal injury and estate planning. And he wasn't looking to expand, but he was like, you can just work here until you find a job. So I was there, and I found a job doing doc review at Chase Bank with a lot of my classmates who were lawyers who couldn't find jobs. So it was kind of great. It was a little community of us who all couldn't get employment, but we were all working together. And when I was in law school, I had done a couple of clinics. So I'd done the mediation clinic at our law school where you mediate actual small claims cases. It was terrifying. And then I did this other clinic in restorative justice, and in that clinic, I had met 2 prosecutors. And so I'm doing doc review, so that's kind of the backstory. I'm doing doc review, living my life, and I ran into one of those prosecutors at an event that I volunteered at, and he was like, "So what are you doing, with your life?" And I said, I don't know. I'm trying to find a job. I might open up my own firm. Like, I didn't know. And he was like, "Well, why don't you come apply at the DA's office?" And I was like, I don't know how to do that. Like, I had really kind of avoided all of the difficult, like, criminal litigation classes at law school because it's not the area that I thought I was going to go into, and it just seemed scary to me at the time. So I avoided all those things that would have prepared me for being a prosecutor. I didn't do advanced evidence or trial ad. And so he said, I think because he knew me from the clinic, he said, I think that you have a good, like, moral base, right? That's the important part of being a prosecutor. Can you do the right thing? Do you have a good moral base? He's like, I think that you can learn everything else, so just apply. And I was like, okay. So I sent my application to this one deputy DA in our office, and he didn't respond to my email. So I went back to the prosecutor and I said, well, I emailed him and he didn't respond. And he was like, just keep doing it. So I said, okay. So I sent another follow-up email. And then when you're like a law student or you're a new lawyer, you feel so scared that you're bothering someone, like they must be busy. He must have things to do. He's a deputy DA. Like, he has to have things that he's doing, which is true. So 3 or 4 emails, and then the prosecutor, who was basically acting as a sponsor to me, he said, well, let me call him. So he called this deputy DA, and we got a response, and I got in for an interview. And that was the first of, like, 3 interviews that I had before I was actually hired. But in meeting with first of all, that prosecutor that I was talking about, I mean, if he hadn't pushed me, I wouldn't be working at the DA's office. Like, he pushed because he saw something in me that he thought the office could use, and he was more sure than I was. But he'd been in the office at that point for 15 years, so he was respected in that sense. He's a judge now, actually, Judge Paul Gudinski. So people knew him and respected him and his opinion. And then the deputy that I met with, that I interviewed with, after we talked, then he liked me. So then he became the person who was vouching for me. And his name's Lavelle Johnson. He's still a mentor of mine to this day, and he's still in the office. But without those 2, I mean, I don't get there. I don't get to the next interview, or then the panel of interviews that I ended up doing before I got hired. So for me, and I just want to add, just because we're talking about diversity and inclusion, I don't want to go over my time, but I think there's also a level that I have to acknowledge about being an attorney of color, because I think, for me, I'm first-generation college graduate, so getting past college was an accomplishment in my family, but then I didn't have anyone in my family who was a lawyer. I didn't know lawyers who looked like me to be able to go talk to, and, okay, it's, how did you get to where you were? And a lot of it is about just representation, just being like being a child or being a younger person of color and seeing yourself in different careers, right? Because if you can see someone who looks like you in that field, then you think, I can do that too. It's just basic representation. So coming into law school with kind of no knowledge of, attorneys of color in my area, and kind of like, where do I fit in, or what is within my reach, I gravitated towards business because that's what I majored in college. It's what I knew. So that's why I veered away from what I'm currently doing, which is criminal litigation. But I veered from that because I went with what I knew. And if I didn't have people along the way who encouraged me at different times and pushed me and vouched for me to say, I know this person, she'll be great at this. Who cares if she can't do a trial? She'll learn that on that first day when you give her a trial, which is what happens. But if I didn't have that, then I wouldn't have had, some of the opportunities. So I feel a great amount of responsibility to do that too. When I go back to the law school and I speak to students, especially students of color, many of them come from out of state, where they come here, and it's kind of, I don't want to say culture shock, but in a way it can be culture shock if you come from other more diverse areas, come to Milwaukee, and it's diverse but segregated, so you're not going to see in this, even if you look in this room, you're not going to see half the room be attorneys of color, everywhere you go. So that can be intimidating, and that adds a level also of, when you're new and young and there aren't many who look like you, it can be hard to build those relationships, which makes it even more important to reach back out to those younger attorneys. So I had people like that who vouched for me and pushed me, and that helped me.
Thanks, Brittany. I'd like to conclude this by talking about how to really foster a successful mentoring relationship. We've talked about the concepts of mentorship, the concepts of sponsorship, but, what does it take? What can, two lawyers who are in a mentoring relationship do to foster the success, to grow the relationship? Maybe Ida, could you start?
And I'll do it by building on what Brittany revealed, because she was attracted to a field of law because it was comfortable. And that's human nature. We all do that. We're also attracted to people who make us feel comfortable, so we tend to be with people who are like us. And considering that the focus today is on diversity and inclusion, and considering the problems that the legal profession has in this area, building those relationships requires becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. It means reaching out to people who are not like us, especially if you're someone, when I talked about sponsorship before, as a sponsor, you have a particular ability here to reach out to people who are not like you, who may not be the apparent superstar, the one that has, where you may have to dig a little deeper, and you don't always know. I was the first in my family to go to college, and I actually wasn't even born in the United States and came here with my parents as a refugee. But, at this point in my life, that's not the major factor. But when I went to law school, I went because people encouraged me. I got a job because people encouraged me. And, a lot of the things, I had the same experience. Obviously, I wasn't a person of color. I didn't have that. But I had other things that made it hard for me. And so understanding that what you see on the surface isn't necessarily the whole package. And so what makes a good relationship? I say, first of all, being curious. Instead, as lawyers, we're trained to be experts. And so what we want to do is give information instead of being open to learning new information. And so curiosity is a big part of that. Listening, not as an advocate where you're looking for flaws, and weaknesses, but listening to be supportive. Making a little effort to trust. There are some people who trust others until they're given a reason not to, and people who don't trust until somebody proves that they're trustworthy. Which camp do you think most lawyers fall into? And so it requires being a little vulnerable. Talking a little bit more about yourself, and I'm talking about mentors in particular, because the mentees usually are pretty vulnerable. They're scared to death, especially, if they're very young, very junior. But it's true at any point. If you're a successful lawyer and you now are in a leadership role and you've never done it before and you don't know how to manage an office, you've got to be willing to say, listen, I need some help here, help me. And so it's these are things as lawyers we sometimes have to overcome what we've learned that's made us successful as lawyers and go back to, what does it take to have a human relationship? And the whole point of these relationships, the more we build on them, the more people feel that we care about them. And that's how you keep people who are different, how you bring them into a profession. You've got to give them a feeling that somebody actually does care about their success, about them as people, not as numbers for the diversity report, but as somebody because they have potential and give them an idea that they have a future here.
Margaret, what are your tips for the audience on building a successful mentoring relationship?
I think I want to repeat again to reach out because it's not going to happen, especially for the one wanting to get a mentor. Please reach out and then follow up. I really thought it was interesting what you said about 3-4 emails because that is what it takes. Persistence is a good quality for any of us. And if the mentor doesn't respond or the applicant, you're applying for a job, doesn't respond, yes, that other person is busy, but we have guilt on our side. My guilt is, oh my gosh, that person's emailed me 3 times and I haven't answered. I feel terrible. Okay, so we're usually if the person follows up again, it's not a bad thing. It's not a problem. But as the person who's junior, you feel that way. And the other thing, and we talked about this on our phone call, is get something scheduled. I cannot stress strongly enough how important this is. So if you had a lunch with somebody and you think it's a good relationship and it's helpful to you, ask if you can schedule another one when you finish the first lunch, because we're all busy, we're all committed, mostly overcommitted. And so, hey, you know what, could we have another coffee again in 4 weeks or 6 weeks? Well, of course, and if I look at my schedule now, I'm like, oh yeah, 6 weeks, no problem. And today I happen to be running from one thing to the next, but when I'm a month out or 2 months out, it looks pretty good. So I think following up and scheduling, and we had a young group of lawyers. I practice in elder law, which is, kind of a weird, still new area after 15 or 20 years. And so there were a very small group of elder law attorneys, and we used to get together and mentor each other. We would have a lunch group, and we would get together, and we had some weird name for the lunch bunch. Well, now there's a second generation in our law firms. There's younger lawyers. Well, they decided that they were going to have their own get-together, their own lunch bunch, and they call it Brain Trust 2, which I think is cool. But anyway, the idea being that they were going to get together and support each other and mentor each other, and they schedule that lunch, every once a month. I do that with other colleagues, like I said, who run small law firms. I'm like, okay, let's get together and have a little, I'll try to use nice words, complaint session. What are we struggling with? How can we help each other? So getting it on the schedule, following up, really important.
Thanks, Margaret. Brittany, what are your thoughts?
I think persistence is a good one. I would reiterate that. I also think do what you're comfortable with. So I think just like generationally, so I'm that generation that still had landlines when I was younger. I didn't have a cell phone until I think I was like a freshman in college, so like 2003. So the generation though after that is very comfortable on their phone. So like texting and almost uncomfortable having phone conversations. Mm-hmm. So I'm not suggesting that you just text people, but I'm just saying if it's more in your wheelhouse to send an email, that's fine too. If you don't want to pick up the phone because that's just too much, it's okay to send an email. And I think also what I've told law students is once you kind of get a script of what works for you, like you don't need to send 3 paragraphs. We're not going to read it. We're not, because we're busy and we're not going to read it. So keep it kind of short and simple. Hi, I met you at whatever event. I heard you speak at whatever event. Do you have time for coffee? I'm very interested in, enter, whatever the field is. Do you have time to get together, and kind of keep it simple, but then understand too when Margaret talks about guilt. I mean, I've had where I get 40 emails in like 2 hours, and a law student has emailed me, and I read it, and then in my head I respond, and then I don't respond in real life, and then 4 days later I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't respond to that email, and I feel horrible. So being persistent is okay. We're not going to get annoyed. We're not going to be too busy. It's just that sometimes we forget because we all kind of have lives. So being persistent and then staying in your comfort zone. Don't feel like you have to have a bunch of mentors. Like, don't compare yourself to the next person. Like, well, they have 3 and I only have 1. If you meet someone that you like and it's natural, just kind of let it develop. Don't feel pressure to know more people or reach out to more people than the next person.
Tom, what are your tips for the audience?
You've got the core of it just in listening here. I mean, I don't know of any good mentor-mentee relationship that isn't truly a relationship. So it really is a series of conversations. I get to know somebody not in 15 minutes. I get to know them in 15-minute increments spread over lots of meetings. And so I think the follow-up piece, Margaret talked about it, I think that's absolutely critical. And sticking with it. And as I look out into this audience, I think there's as many mentors out here sitting listening to us as there are mentees or certainly future mentors. And I will tell you, at least for me personally, I have taken the approach that when people reach out, and email's a very common one, by the way, I get that probably more than the phone calls anymore, and I set up that time, it is no different to me personally than a client appointment. I will not blow that off. I will not show up or cancel it, because it is an equally valuable relationship for me too. And so as all of you are stepping or in those roles, sometimes those can be the pieces, particularly where the pressures of practice and everything, build up. I'd say hold that commitment, because you'll find it as rewarding as the individual that you're mentoring.
Thank you. I think this is a good point to open it up for questions. Does anybody have a question for our panelists? Go ahead.
So a common law firm model for mentoring is that when associates come in, they are assigned a mentor by the firm, who is usually a partner, and it's usually someone that the firm thinks will be like that person enough to be a good mentor. And that's well-intentioned, but I think there are a number of shortfalls to that, including the match may not be a good one, but the associate may feel obligated to continue in the relationship. It creates a kind of check-the-box approach to mentoring, where those who are assigned to do it feel obligated and everyone else feels absolved, because that's taken care of. And I wonder if you have any concrete tips for firms that are looking to create, or any institution that's looking to create a true culture of mentoring where it's everyone's responsibility and privilege.
Great question.
Thanks for your point. I think it's a really valid one. You know, I do worry sometimes about where formalized mentoring programs are a check-the-box experience, not even so much for the individuals involved, but somehow on an external reporting requirement. Hey, of course we have a mentoring program, and in reality it's not particularly functional. I would say, and this is one of the ways I've certainly gone about it, doesn't mean it's the right way to go about it, but among the shareholders or others involved, knowing where there are other more formalized mentoring programs, so it's tapping people outside of the firm as well. I think, I've encouraged folks that practice on my team, get connected, find those opportunities. That's one of the ways that I think you can go about it. Other ways, I think, internal that I have seen are those that express interest. Not everybody wants to be in a role where they're, serving as that. They may feel like, I'm being told to do it, I don't really want to do it. I'm not sure I'd have them in the program, to be honest with you, because I just think it can create a sort of a negative experience. That's hard to ferret out. I think everybody likes to think they could be a good guide for folks, but not everybody wants to really do it. So I don't know that gets right to your point. Your point, I hear you 100% that a lot of those programs are not necessarily set up for success because they're not particularly well thought through or managed. But if you do it and manage it and think it through, I think it can be very successful, at least for the limited approach of what an inside mentoring relationship can mean. There's some mentoring relationships, from my perspective, you're not going to hear what you need to hear inside. Mm-hmm. You have to hear it outside, whether it's specialty area or career progression or something like that. So,
Is there an ability in the program to say, I'd like to switch? I'm working with so-and-so, and without offending anyone, I think I might be a better match with somebody else. Is that possible?
Yeah, it at least where I am, it is, but it comes along with the natural stigma of rejecting the institutional relationship that's been created for you. And there's also this verticality to it that makes you think, well, the only people that I can go to for mentoring are partners.
Right.
And the more lateral type of mentoring isn't necessarily institutionally recognized either.
Yeah, and I don't know in a bigger firm, but I do encourage like my younger associates, hey, why don't you guys go out to lunch together and I'll pay for that because you need to talk to each other and you need to help each other. And I'll do the same thing if someone's got a new project and I'll say, well, so-and-so did the similar thing, 6 months or a year ago. Why don't you sit down with her and talk it through before you get started? So, I think part of that is the culture of the firm. Is it being encouraged? Is it, something that people care enough about to foster?
Yeah, one thing I like about your question is the question of how do you create a culture of mentorship? Not even, how do we structure a formal program, but how do we encourage people to make the time for people who are just starting out or making a change, who need some guidance? Ida, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, but we don't have enough time, and I'd be happy to talk with
Briefly.
you afterwards about your program, because, when you're talking about that, remember what I said earlier, you can have the most elegant program that's ever been designed, but if you don't have the cultural underpinnings for it, if you reward people only for billing hours and not for supporting each other or teaching each other, or if you discourage it and you penalize people for it, or if the personalities in the office are abrasive or just are, if this is seen as kind of something I have to do, not something I want to do. There are so many different aspects to it that you can't I couldn't give you an answer about your program that's going to make sense for somebody else's. And so you need to put it in place, you need to educate people, you need to reward people and encourage people. You can't have a program that isn't run. They are not self-executing experiences. I mean, by design, this is a program. A program needs an administrator. A program needs to be measured. It has to have clear goals that are then measured to see if it's working. So there are so many different pieces. I think we could probably spend our time more productively in here on something else, but I would be more than happy to talk with you afterwards or give me a call about specifics.
What other questions can we answer?
None of you mentioned social media. And for younger lawyers like myself, I think myself and my peers have grown up being very comfortable with social media. So I'm curious, is that facilitating mentorship? Can it? Does it? Are there any platforms, not to be crass, but is there an app for that sort of thing?
How honest is social media? I mean, just seriously, and we have all these listservs where especially younger lawyers can put questions out say, well, you know what, I have a new guardianship hearing coming up and I'm not sure how to handle that, any tips? But there's a sort of hesitation, of exposing yourself. My experience with social media is it's all about how great you're doing and how wonderful you are and how terrific everybody else around you is and not necessarily where you might have a weakness.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Brittany.
I'm in that phase of remembering not having social media, but then growing into it, so I can see kind of both arguments on it. And I just think it's too informal, depending on the kind of mentorship you're seeking. So, I have friends who are like mentors. They're older attorney, a little bit older than me in their career, but we're actually friends outside of that. So for me and those people, it's okay that we communicate on social media. But I think if you're trying to develop professional relationships, that's not where you should start, because I think lots of attorneys, especially in my age group, like to separate their social media, this is fun, this is friends, this is informal, from their professional kind of persona. So I probably wouldn't lead with that, would be my advice, although I think you could use LinkedIn. If that's technically social media, it's more professional.
That's more where I was going.
Yes.
True.
Like the LinkedIn
Yes.
sort of professional avenues, not
True.
sending them a direct message on Facebook.
Absolutely, and I've noticed that when I've spoken to law students, they'll say, "Oh, what's your LinkedIn page?" And that's how they want to communicate with me, which is fine with me. But it's gone from "Can I have your card?" which I still get that sometimes, to "What's your LinkedIn?" And then I'll leave a talk, and they will have requested me on LinkedIn, and then they send messages that way. I think that's totally fine because that's totally professional. So.
This is generational to some extent, being older. I'm going to say it's definitely generational.
Well, I'm not going to fight you for who's the oldest, but I actually wrote a chapter in my book, or part of my book, about what's happening, because I would vary something that Brittany said. I wouldn't end there. I might start there, but I wouldn't end, because first of all, it's interesting to me to see the whole phenomenon of people, and it's not just LinkedIn and the sites that we know, but there are wikis, there are apps, as a matter of fact, where they'll find, you can link to a mentor. There are people who volunteer to be mentors in particular areas. So if you're looking for someone, you can go to one of those apps. If you just look up mentoring apps, Google it, you'll find something. And so you can be introduced to people, you can meet people that way. Obviously, that's not a relationship. And the other thing is, there are a lot of sites where you can gather information. You can follow people who you see as experts. You can reach out to those people sometimes using social media. But keep in mind that it's always going to be generic. You're always, and actually, it's generic, but until you have a relationship, even with mentors, I don't want people to think that just because you have a good mentoring relationship means you have to believe everything a mentor says. Because you may trust that mentor may know something that's fabulous and helpful in one area, but not in another. For women, years ago, the big issue was that every time you talk to a man about developing business, they would talk to you about golf. And the assumption was that if you played golf, you could be a rainmaker, and if you didn't play golf, forget it. And, so giving somebody the advice that's meaningless to them, I've got 2 babies at home, and my husband's on the road, and I've only got 2 hours to do this. So, you need to be able to taper the advice and to get the advice that's useful for you. But I think in terms of sources of potential mentors looking for people, why not? But just don't end it there. Don't think that because you're having a conversation with someone through social media that that's a mentoring relationship. It can be, but you just have to use your judgment about whether it really is or not, and whether, how meaningful it is.
One thing I would add to that, I do think it legitimately can be a spot to help identify individuals, and in fact, I would encourage people to do that. I don't think, though, that that's where you can create the relationship. I mean, that the relationship that comes with a real mentor is going to have to come in, you know what I mean, that in person. Plus, I will tell you, I get questions all the time from mentors that I'm most willing to answer verbally. I will not write it down. Somebody may ask me, hey, I'm doing a career shift. I'd like to go over to this law firm. And I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea at all. Let me tell you why. For you or for your circumstance, you know what I mean? So that just social media is a little difficult for that. But starting there, my kids are very, and I see that same sort of generational sort of thing going on. And that's how my kids are identifying people, information, and I think it can be a very powerful tool.
Yeah, I try to make a habit after almost any networking event or conference. If I meet people that I've had a conversation with that's lasted, more than oh, hi, I'm Allison, I'm from Godfrey and Kahn, I try to, connect with them on LinkedIn. And if it's been a really substantive conversation, send them a little message to just start the ball rolling. It may or may not turn into anything. But, when you meet lots of people at an event, if you don't make that connection quickly, people can forget.
There's also, people become thought leaders on social media. And when you see somebody who's a thought leader in an area that you're interested in, what's surprising is, going back to what we talked about earlier, people don't reach out. And I'm always surprised. I get calls from people all the time who ask me if I'd be their mentor. I don't know them and stuff. And I got a call from Australia one time. And that was kind of interesting. We developed a relationship. But, most people, especially if they've set themselves up to be thought leaders, they're perfectly happy when you contact them in that capacity, and because it's flattering. I'm the expert, you recognize that? Sure, I'll tell you. And so, give it a shot. What do you have to lose, especially if they don't know you yet?
So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Go ahead in the back.
When we talk about the subject of diversity and mentorship, we talk about cross-gender or cross-race or cross-sexual orientation. Someone made the comment of you need to be okay with being uncomfortable. Can you expound upon what you mean by being okay being uncomfortable?
Did everybody hear that question about being uncomfortable? The easiest thing is to go to what you know. And so, if I'm mentoring somebody from a different culture, from a different world, it's going to take more effort on my part for me to feel comfortable asking them the same questions I might not have any trouble, asking of Margaret. And so, how do you do that? And part of that is being respectfully curious. Not prying, not being nosy. I'll give you the best example I know is a lawyer I interviewed one time in Oakland, where I live in California. He had a small practice, and he was known for being a mentor to many, many different lawyers. And I asked him once, how do you do that? Because Oakland is an incredibly diverse community. And he had mentored so many people and so many who were so different. And he said, I would sit down with them and say, look, I want to help you. I don't really know you well, and I'm an old white guy, and you're the Mexican American, you're a Laotian, you're a Vietnamese, whatever, and so I'm interested in helping, and I'm also interested in learning. I can't advise you, and I don't want you to think that I'm being too pushy about this without knowing more. But if you ever feel that I'm going too far, if I'm making you uncomfortable, you tell me to stop. I don't want to go too far. And by the same token, you ask me whatever you want, and I'll try to be honest. So he kind of pushed down the barriers and realized, he said, if you don't want to talk about this, we don't have to. If any point, a year from now, you feel more comfortable, you want to, that's fine. But just, kind of being honest that way with people, because most of us aren't usually in positions where we're the only one in the room. I mean, the women in here have probably all been the only one in the room at some point. Some of the men may more now, it may not be as unusual. Some of the people of color, have probably been the only black woman in the room, the only, Latina in the room or something like that. But that's not the reverse. Most white men have not been the only one in the room. So, go to a black church one day. Go to some place where you won't be the majority. See what that feels like. Developing a sense of empathy, it's a big word these days, but it's not just feeling what somebody feels, it's kind of understanding as well. So finding a way to put yourself in a position where it's okay and realizing that by doing that, that brings you a little bit further along in making other people comfortable with you.
Thanks, Ida. I think with that, we are out of time, and that's a good spot to end on. Thanks, everybody, for coming. You've been a great audience. If you have any questions, I think at least a few of our panelists will be able to stick around for a few minutes.